All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. For people who are regular listeners to the show, over the course of doing this podcast, I've interviewed everyone from Juno winners to basement punk bands who've played one show to everything in between. And I think that the guest on this episode of the podcast is someone who, as far as Winnipeg musicians go, has been one of the more successful, best known internationally artists over the past few decades. And I think that the best way to start this off is if you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and then we can talk about all the new things that you have going on.
Well, my name's Brad Roberts, and I'm in a band called Crash Test Dummies. We had a big hit with Superman Song in 1991 in Canada, and then we did not have a big hit with in Canada, but we did have a big hit with in America, and then internationally. Um, and that's the basis of our early history, at least.
Sure. And I guess the reason we're talking now is because you have a new single out, and it seems like over the past few years, not including the pandemic, of course, but your band has really sort of made a bit of a comeback in the sense that you've done tours for anniversaries of some of your first record, and now you have this new single. You're playing lots of shows. Was this something you expected to happen this far down the road after a long hiatus?
No, not at all. I did not expect this to happen. I don't think any of us did. Um, but we played a show with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, and we had such a great time that we decided to go back on the road. Then the pandemic hit, and we were halted. But since that has lifted, we've been on the road ever since, and touring extensively throughout America and Canada and Europe. And I think we're going to Australia and South Africa as well.
Oh wow! So this is like a full on. It's still actively happening at this point. Like you're in tour mode now.
Yes, in a big way. I just finished a month of dates that went from New York down to Atlanta, Georgia, and then came back up through the Midwest.
What is it like touring on this material that in many cases is 3-4 decades old, and people obviously have a strong connection to it. The fans that I'm sure are coming to your shows, but at this point in time, after all these years, do you still feel a connection to some of these songs and this material that you did, when you were an up and coming band from Winnipeg?
Well, I'm very fortunate to still be comfortable with the material that I wrote when I was a young man. Um, I think that God Shoveled His Feet stands the test of time. I think Superman Song stands the test of time. Um, the other thing, too, is that you have to remember when you play this material for people in an audience, they're hearing it live for the first time in many cases, or, the second time maybe. Um, so for them, it's fresh and new. And even though I might have played that song 100 times, when I play it for a new audience, their appreciation is infectious, and
Right.
it makes it possible for me to enjoy that same old material.
Do you have a good grasp on sort of what your audience is at these shows? I mean, I imagine there's a lot of people who would have seen you live or bought your records the first time around, but there's probably some younger people too who, like you say, are experiencing this fresh and new.
Yeah, in fact, there's three streams of population that we have going on at our shows. There are the people that heard the music when they were young, and by young, I mean anywhere from childhood to sort of college age. So they might, when Superman Song came out, they might be 10 years old, they might be 25 years old. Um, and then we have their kids coming to our shows because their kids grew up listening to their parents' record collection, and we were in it.
Yeah.
And then the third generation we have going is their kids now, because it's actually come to that. The people that listen to us now have grandchildren, and they show up at the shows, and they're often just tykes, or they're in their early teens. Um, so it's very interesting to see how the music has been passed from generation to generation like that.
What do you think is the lasting appeal of it? Because obviously, I mean, you mentioned Superman's song as being sort of the big hit. That song you still hear, especially in Winnipeg, on the radio almost daily, it seems, and it's still a present song in kind of the ether. What do you think has made it last? I mean, not that song in particular, but just your sound in general.
That's a good question.
Because styles have changed, right? Styles of things have come and gone, and you seem to be sort of a constant. Something in it works.
I I really don't know. I I think that's a question that I'm not in a position to answer. I think that people that are perceiving the music that I'm writing are the only ones that could really answer that question.
Right. Once it's put out into the world, it's kind of out of your hands, and it's up to the audiences to decide what it
I,
means to them.
that's how I feel, yeah.
Well, I think that of those groups that you mentioned, I mean, I think I fit into the first group. I'm 40, and I would have first heard you probably when I was a kid, and I think I would have first seen you live around 1999, maybe 2000.
Oh,
And so I can definitely see there's people my age and of course older who would be sort of having this nostalgia thing, right? They grew up with these records and they wanted to
mhm.
come see you and hear what you're doing now. Does that? I mean, now that you have a new song out, does that sort of feeling of nostalgia? Is that something you consider, knowing that people have loved your band for all these years because of certain elements in the sound, or are you comfortable at this point to just this is some new music we're making, this is what it sounds like?
Um, the latter, I think. We the the song that I just put out is influenced by a lot of things that weren't really on the plate on the table for me when I was a younger man. When the pandemic started, I began studying classical piano and counterpoint, which is a method of composition that's about 400 years old. And it really influenced the way I was writing. And as a result, our new single, although it still sounds like Crash Test Dummies, um, is definitely a new take on what we've done in the past. So I don't feel constrained by um, any sort of expectations. I feel like I can just put what I want out into the ether, and that it will um, it will garner attention, uh, as much as attention as it garners, and no less and no more. And there's not much I can do about that except try and get it on playlists and do all the obvious practical stuff.
Well, and that's completely different too from sort of the height of your popularity as a band. The way the whole ecosystem of how music is consumed and shared and heard has completely changed. What is that like? Sort of releasing new music now and realizing that everything is different about how people are even finding records in the first place.
Well, it's interesting. Um, when we released this song years ago, when you released a song, you tried to work it at radio. Now people don't even try and work radio; they try and work streaming platforms.
Yeah.
And people don't tend to talk as much to newspapers; they talk a lot more to podcasters. Um, so the whole landscape has changed, like you say, and I just find it all very interesting. And I just try and go with the flow. And nowadays people are releasing one song at a time. And so I decided, why not do that? I had one song and I really liked it, and I thought it would be fun to play in our live shows, and so why not record it?
Is that something that you're hoping to do more of now that this is out in the world? Is that has that kind of sparked interest in recording more new music or releasing more new music? Because I'm sure you've been writing
Yeah,
continually.
I'm writing a companion piece to Sacred Alphabet right now, which takes the lyric that already exists in Sacred Alphabet and expands on it.
Okay.
Um, I don't have a record in mind, to be quite honest with you. I've just been kind of pecking away at it song by song.
Which
And
is sort
we'll
of how
see.
things work now anyway.
Yes, exactly.
So at this point, I think I read in one of your bios or on the website or something that many of you are living in different cities at this point. So how does this whole process of being a band and getting together and writing, rehearsing, touring, How are the logistics now that you're not all together?
Well, the recording was an interesting process. I recorded the piano and the vocals in New York City, and then I sent the tracks around to my various band members, and they're spread out between Winnipeg, Toronto, and Nova Scotia. Um, so I sent them all the the original tracks, and they each in turn in their home studios put down their own parts, sent those parts back to me, and I sifted through them all and decided which ones to use and which ones to leave aside and when to bring in what, and um, ended up with a very nice result. It's not a process I've ever undertaken before, um, so it was new for me, but it was really enjoyable, and I would love to do it again. As far as the touring and that goes, we generally don't have too much trouble because on the first, if we're doing a tour and we haven't toured in a while, in a few months, then we'll generally just book ourselves flights to the first town on our tour, and we'll set up a rehearsal for a couple of days before our show, and
Okay.
then the show acts as a dress rehearsal, as it were. The first show is more or less a dress rehearsal, and we take it from there, and it just seems to get tighter every night.
With this new single, I mean, like you said, it definitely sounds like Crash Test Dummies, but it is a little different. Obviously, you're getting what you're being influenced by is different with the classical elements and things like that. It has a very kind of moody vibe to it, which is cool. One of the things I think that I liked about your band to begin with is when I first heard you, I was into heavier music. I thought, oh, this is some folk thing. I don't want to hear it. And then I saw you play. It must have been at the Folk Fest, maybe '99 or 2000, and you would. I think it was your fourth album, which was the very kind of. It was a lot funkier. It had a lot of the falsetto vocals, and there was sort of the drum bass stuff happening, and that got me really interested. I really enjoyed sort of that alternate version of what I thought you were as a band, and that made me much more interested in going back to your previous records and sort of giving them the chance that I didn't give them before. So I guess, do you have an idea of sort of what the sound of your band is at this point after all these years? Because from record to record and even song to song, in some cases, I guess you can put it under a folk rock umbrella if you want to be, really, really wide ranging. But there's a lot of different things happening. Do you have an idea of what it is that you do as a band?
Well, you're exactly right. We've made a lot of different sounding records over the years. Our first record was very folky. Our second record was quite a bit more sophisticated sounding, I would say. It combined guitars with a lot of synthesizers, and had a much more slick sound, I think. But I personally prefer it to our first record. Our third record was more of a hard rock affair with lots of electric guitars, not so many synthesizers. Um, and then our fourth record, as you say, was kind of funky sounding. Our fifth record was very much in the country vein. The next one was kind of pop, and then there was another one that was rather apocalyptic. Um, and then there's this kind of fun record I made with toy instruments. So that there isn't really we don't really have one sound, and our set list reflects that. We take tunes from many of our records, and they all manage to hang together because, despite the fact that they all have different influences and reflect different genres, they're all written by me.
Right.
So they come from the same brain, and therefore they have a commonality.
That makes sense for sure. Yeah. Is it easier at this point? Now that you're sort of a number of years past sort of the commercial peak, I guess, of the band. Is
Hmm.
it easier now to sort of just go out and play these songs? And I imagine there's less expectations that you put on yourselves as well as on you from the public and from the music industry at this point because because time has passed, are you able to just go out and just enjoy this now without having to worry about any of those sort of elements floating around?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you're right on the money. When I was a young man, I touring was a much more arduous affair because I had so much press to do. I used to get up at 8 in the morning and start doing 20-minute interviews and doing them, every 20 minutes for all day long. And in many cases, I'd have to be driven to radio stations and, taken around to various studios and so forth and so on. And it really was utterly exhausting because then after having worked an entire day at press,
Yeah,
I'd have a show to do at night. And that in itself is arduous. So um, for me, touring was a necessary evil when I was a young man. Now it's something I do with pleasure because I don't have that kind of arduous schedule. I have a much more relaxed pace, and although we're still in a different town every day, and driving for hours between times, it's nevertheless a much easier process for me than it was in the past, and I'm much happier to tour than I ever was.
that's good. That's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'd be doing it if you weren't, right? I mean, at this point,
Yes, true enough.
for the most part, the band is it's most of the same people who played on the earlier albums. What do you think it is that works so well between the group of you? Like, why does this still work as a band after all these years and all
Well,
these records and tours?
I think it's because we've never lost our enthusiasm for the music. Um, and everybody's improved over time. People haven't let their skills atrophy. On the contrary, they've expanded them.
So that obviously makes it easier to to pull off live, I imagine, when everyone's just
Yes,
improved. Yeah.
I think it makes a big difference. Yeah.
So what is the do you have an idea of what the future of the band is at this point, or are you just sort of going with the flow and enjoying it as it happens?
Well, you know, it's I'm not really going with the flow. I'm definitely doing what I want to do, which is specific and considered. Um, and what I want to do right now is release new music and tour. And that's pretty much what I'm doing. Um, like I said, I've got a companion piece for the new single that we're writing that we just put out, Sacred Alphabet, which is on all kinds of streaming platforms.
Yep,
And we've been playing it live as well, and it's been going over like gangbusters, which surprised me because we were playing it live before it was even out, and we were getting standing ovations for it. And ordinarily, when you play a song for a crowd that they've never heard, they're not necessarily as receptive to it as the material that they're more familiar with. So I was taken aback that people, were giving me standing ovations for the song, um, just based on a first listen. And now that the song is out, we're starting to get requests for it at shows, so that's nice. It just on in 2 days of being on Spotify, we already had 10,000 spins. So I
that's
thought,
cool. Yeah.
yeah,
So it shows that you're more than just people aren't seeing you as a nostalgia act; they're seeing you as a band with a deep catalog that is still making interesting and vital music.
apparently so. Yes, I'm happy to rediscover this after many years.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is, and I know you're not in Winnipeg now, but I mean, your band I think is very associated with Winnipeg, especially in the '90s, early '90s, and as an export that did well, local folks done good kind of thing. What do you think it is about Winnipeg? You've probably been asked this before, but why does Winnipeg sort of generate so much creativity? It's something that I've been trying to figure out, sort of, every week talking to people from all different musical backgrounds, and I sort of get different answers every time. But like, is there something in the water here? Where do we get the creativity from?
You know, for me, it was an ongoing fascination with music that I had ever since I was a child. But I think Winnipeg as a city, you know, the winters are long, and either you play hockey or you join a band. And I joined a band. I mean, I did play hockey too, but I was terrible. The pinnacle of my hockey career was in grade 4. I got the most improved player award. It meant that you had to start off really sucking pretty badly in order to get the award.
For sure, yeah, yeah.
Uh, but I think the long winters drive people to be creative. That may be an oversimplification, but it's certainly not far from the truth in my own case. I
No, I
mean,
think it has something to do with it for a lot of people. Yeah, it's just having that time to fill with something, and
yeah,
guitar lying around it usually becomes the something.
yes.
Where can people find out? I mean, the good thing about this being a podcast is someone could hear it when it comes out, the day it comes out, or they could hear it a year from now. What's the best way to sort of keep track of what you're doing as a band? Where you're playing shows? Maybe you'll have new music out in the future. How can people find you online?
Well, crashtestdummies.com is our home online, and there you can find all of our music for sale or for there's links to listening platforms. Um, that's where our tour dates are all listed. That's on the very first page that you get to, shows our tour dates. And when we put out a song, as we did with Sacred Alphabet, there's a page that comes up before you can even get to our webpage that asks you if you want to hear the song. And so it's very easy to access that way.
Cool.
crashtestdummies.com.
And is the whole catalog on there? Like, can you access the
Yep.
entire? Right on, right on. The wonders of technology.
Yes. And I'm just about finished getting all of my catalog onto Spotify and the rest of the streaming platforms.
Very cool.
Most of it up.